Congratulations to you, Mr. President, on your anniversary. I'm sure this was the most romantic place you could imagine, here with me. So under the president's policies, middle-income Americans have been buried. They're just being crushed. I'm sorry, Jim, I'm going to stop the subsidy to PBS. I'm going to stop other things. I like PBS. I love Big Bird. I actually like you, too. But I'm not going to keep on spending money on things to borrow money from China to pay for.
2 minutes is up, sir.
No, I think I had 5 seconds before you interrupted me.
For those who can remember the VH1 days of the pop-up videos. All right. Now, every armchair shrink here has got a theory as to why each candidate performed the way that they did on Wednesday. Some, believe it or not, even blame the altitude.
God.
When you go to 5,000 feet, exactly, and you only have a few hours to adjust.
That's interesting.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
No, you know what's the worst thing about that? Were the two sycophants sitting there going, exactly. Wow, interesting.
If you're running through some linemen with a football in your hand,
yeah,
but
maybe.
Didn't he accept his party's nomination in that same city?
That he did.
All right, let's get into the style of what we learned Wednesday, because as much as there was the positive that Romney could actually deliver, seemingly with facts on command, etc., we also learned maybe it was just a bad night, but maybe it was more than just a bad night in terms of stylistically about the president. And there was a few things that at least jumped to me. And Basil, you've been working with candidates getting up to it. But for me, every president lives in a bubble. And you kind of have to a certain degree, even though President Obama said when he was inaugurated, I won't live in a bubble. I'm going to make sure that I stay connected to the outside public. Easier said than done.
Absolutely.
The one thing that happens in that bubble, though, as we all know, is you're surrounded by people who think of you as the commander-in-chief. You're no longer the candidate that can say good or bad strategy. They tell you what you want to hear. They only tell you the good stuff, for the most part, I guess. He didn't like getting poked for 90 minutes. He wasn't used to it. He wasn't used to having to share a stage with anybody. And he's got a terrible poker face, and he lets it on real well. How much longer do I have to put up with this?
Yeah, you know, what's interesting, too, you talk about people that work for him. You know, handlers have to work to your strengths. They cannot make you into something that you're not, because that shows a lot more readily than you just being a little bit uncomfortable. It seems like you're completely phony. But so on the one hand, I'm sure that his handlers and the strategists played to his strengths, which are that he is a scholar. He's an extremely brilliant man, but he has a very professorial tone that he takes with people, like he's teaching class, and I teach class, so I understand a little more, like he's actually teaching a class. You know, presidents are symbols. You have to be part commander-in-chief, part empathizer-in-chief, part instructor-in-chief, and you have to be able to use that mix and pick one or a few of these characteristics depending on the moment. So you have to be able to read the moment appropriately. And I think what people wanted to see was him use the power of the presidency to vanquish his opponents. But he's not like that, as he wasn't like that as a candidate when he ran in 08. He had a very similar style when he debated in 08 in the primaries. And he's brought it to the White House when he's governed. And that's what you saw the other night.
If you think, though, in his brief meteoric rise as a politician, we forget, it wasn't that long ago that he was state senator in Springfield, Illinois. The seminal moments, everybody's got their own. But for me, obviously, was his convention address, and then his address on race. Everybody forgets how much the Reverend Wright fiasco almost torpedoed his campaign in the primary process. When he went before that Philadelphia crowd and delivered that speech, I said, I hadn't seen anything like that in my generation.
Absolutely.
So, but then let's think about those moments where he did the best. He had one of these things, and I'm pointing to the camera with the prompter in it. And today, in the comments and the clips that we played from yesterday, excuse me, when he went back in the trail, he's back on prompter. And it can be a crutch, and I think it exposed to a certain degree, because the one thing we all thought, whether you like him or not, guy's facile, he knows his numbers, he can pivot, he can do it in a way that he's not, being too hard, but at the same time, he looked stilted, he looked uncomfortable, he struggled for words at times. Without a doubt, Mitt Romney was far more comfortable with what he was saying. He was more comfortable in his own skin. He was more comfortable in the moment. And I think some of that has to do is if you script everything and you read off of it, when you got to be ad lib, impromptu, responding to, pivoting to something special when somebody's punching you, it's a lot tougher to do.
Well, but that's in part because, and the bubble that presidents wind up in isn't necessarily that they're surrounded by yes men. It's that they've got everything that the president has on their plate that they have to deal with, so they wind up being a part-time candidate in a way that Mitt Romney is a full-time candidate and has been doing the same stump speech again and again and again and again. The president, any president, whether you're talking about George Bush or Ronald Reagan or Barack Obama, has to go from event to event and in between run the country. So they're not as on point with what they're going to be saying in their stump speeches. They need to rely on the notes. They need to rely on the teleprompter. And yes, I think it does put them at a bit of a deficit when they're in a debate format like the president was in on Wednesday.
Remember Bill Clinton's, people don't, I mean, you guys might at this table. Bill Clinton had a State of the Union address, like every president uses the prompter, and George Stephanopoulos famously put the wrong one in. He didn't have prompter, and he delivered a State of the Union address for nearly an hour, and he hit every point he had to make. Now, I'm sure later on he strangled whoever didn't put it in, but the point of the matter is, imagine if that happened to this president.
Well, Bill Clinton's a very rare elected official. Yeah. I mean, people remember his convention speech and not the president's convention speech, interestingly enough. But I think to what everybody's saying, context is very important. In many of the situations that you mentioned, with teleprompter, of course, those situations are controlled. They're not, it's not him going off the cuff. It's very controlled. He can control the message. He can control the language. And he doesn't have to sit there and stop and think about how he's going to respond.
Like a professor giving a lecture.
Right, considering that he's A, president, and B, candidate, and trying to walk that line.
And I want to get to 1 second about Mitt Romney. And again, this is psychobabblish. But I think, TJ, it's fair to say, as a CEO, you always are on offense. You don't want to be on defense, having to defend your stock price. You don't want to have to be on defense explaining earnings. As a CEO or as somebody who ran a business, he's used to dictating, confrontation, one-on-one environments. Now, he's been a governor. I think this is a convenient narrative I'm drawing, I grant you. But think about where he always got in trouble. He got in trouble when he tried to be human, and then also where he tried to also have to pivot and have to explain bad news, have to explain his tax returns, have to explain the Bain years, have to explain. He got to say, all right, I got a target tonight. Guy's standing 6 feet away from me. I'm going after him. I'm going to go after him on the following points. I don't care what Lara asked me. I'm going after him. Yeah. And I think he was more comfortable in that environment than at least I've seen him before. It kind of made sense after the fact.
Sure, because he's a small room guy. He pitches. He's a businessman. He gets stuff done. He talks in the micro as opposed to the macro, you know. And he definitely has used an economy of words. And I think in terms of his being and this, by the way, I got to drop a dime on myself. I have made a living in the last year talking about how he is the worst communications calamity in my lifetime. And holy cow, here he comes out of the park. So the thing is I got to say is that I think at his core, though, he's uncomfortable talking about himself. So, okay, you're in the wrong business is what you think. But when it comes to the personal stuff, you know, it takes his surrogates like his wife to stand there and blow the horn for him and talk in terms of all of his in terms of his altruistic side and the good that he does.
Though it makes it easier once you realize that you're free from the burden of having to actually stick to the truth. And I think Romney may have learned that lesson in advance of the debate.
I think it was a one-on-one lesson for a lot of people. We've learned certain recent political things, and one is, in the 21st century, at least where we are right now, truth be damned. Yep. Say whatever the heck you want and have them prove it later, because the odds are it's going to be tougher to do that than the otherwise. All right, we've got to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to stay with politics, but make it more local. We're going to head to the Garden State with all the focus on the presidential debate you may have missed, major face-off in our region. Senator Menendez debated his Republican challenger Joe Carolus yesterday, got the highlights, and we'll talk about other key races throughout the region. Stay with us.